Yeah. You're listening to Autodesk's Digital Builder Podcast, a show that inspires construction professionals to innovate and use technology to improve how they build our world. I'm Eric Thomas, and I've been working in construction for nearly a decade. And now I have the privilege to sit down with industry trailblazers to hear how they're solving construction's biggest challenges and redefining the future of the built environment. All right, welcome to Autodesk Digital Builder Podcast. I am your host, Eric Thomas. Today, we are filming live in the Autodesk Gallery in San Francisco. I am excited to be back. We are in absolutely beautiful space. If you're listening on Spotify, you really should head over to YouTube and check it out because the visuals are fantastic. But today we are going to be talking all about architecture, architects. I'm going to be learning a bunch of stuff because generally we're on the contractor side of things. So it's going to be a fun conversation. And to get deeper into this story, I am joined by Alma Jauregi, managing partner at House Robertson Architects. So Alma, how are you doing today?
It's Friday, it's sunny, we're in San Francisco, and it's been a pretty okay week this week.
Yeah, it's beautiful. I'm thankful that I brought some good weather when we came into town to do some filming here. And
yes, it was all you.
It was me. I'm going to thank me. Maybe Jenny, one of my colleagues is over here helping out. We'll blame her for bringing that in from Colorado. But, today's all about architecture, architects, collaboration, relationships. And I think this, is expansive across the construction industry as far as how important collaboration and those relationships are. But let's start by hearing a bit more about your architecture firm, House Robertson. So what does a typical week look like for your team? And how does that contrast to some of the other types of architecture firms that are out there in the world?
Interesting question. So I think what I would like to start as at HRA, we are an executive architecture firm. So I think a lot of people in the industry, whether it be contractor, architects, or other developers, don't know what an executive architect is unless they've worked with them before. When you think of architect, there is a full service person, someone who does everything from the drawings, the design, the details, to construction administration, full service architect. And Jim and Doug, who are the founders of House Robertson, when they were working together back at Lang & Wilson, they actually found out that they were only doing the quote unquote executive architecture portion. So they were being the project manager, they were doing all of the details, they were doing all of the construction admin while someone else in the office was doing the actual design. And they said, hey, there's a niche in the market. There's only a few other architecture firms who do only executive architecture. So they decided to branch out and only do that. So essentially what we do is we provide developers, clients, the best of both worlds. You get the really high-end designer or someone who's really good at design, but maybe not strong in the execution part, while we do all of the execution. And we can get more into that, but that's essentially, we do project management, details, and execution of the product of the building or whatever we're working on.
It makes sense because there's so much that goes into moving into the either, the bidding stage, the actual construction phase, and to, have somebody who's so specialized to help shepherd the project into that space. It's a huge win for the owner. It's a huge win for the contractor. Everybody has more information that, feels constructible, I think. And it's just an interesting niche that I was admittedly not super familiar with. And from what you had shared with me before, it was a path that you also hadn't been super familiar with as well. How did you end up working at an executive architecture firm yourself when it wasn't something that is super visible for many folks, at least at the start of their careers?
Not like in architecture school, you get brought on in school and you're just this little megalomaniac creating your own vision, your own world. Gravity doesn't exist, which in fact it does. And then you get out of school and you come into the field and you get hit in the face. It's like, oh, I actually don't get to design the really cool thing. And I'm only going to be rendering or working in the model shop. And then there's learning AutoCAD. At that point, when I came out of school, we weren't learning Revit yet. And then it's, plan check, jurisdictions, the AHJ. What am I doing? What is MEP? And you just get thrown into this whole other world. And ultimately, for me specifically, was I found out, maybe 5 years into my career that my boss, who was the designer, we'd all do our own little charrettes. We'd come back to the end and present it. And ultimately, the design we ended up going with ended up being with what my boss ended up wanting to do, which is fine. His company, his firm, fantastic. You do you. But I kind of got it in the back of my head. It's like, well, just tell me what you want and I will execute it. I don't necessarily care too much about, the geometry or the color or whatever. It's like, you do you, and I will draw it for you. And I found out that I really, really like that. And at some point in my career, I kind of got a bit disillusioned and it was too much stress and all of the good stuff. And I actually had a really good friend of mine who was working at House Robertson. And she said, I know what you like doing. Come work with us. Come here. And finally, I was like, okay, I'm quitting my job. I'm only going to freelance and I'm only applying at HRA. And if I get the job, great. If I don't, then I don't. And then I'm done with architecture. Like I had gotten that disillusioned with the process. I interviewed at HRA. I was hired on the spot. The only reason I said, okay, it's only here or nothing, because this is the only firm where I didn't have to go through the hoops of presenting, of rendering, of trying to sell a concept. Like I like nerding out in the code. Like, can I just do that all day? And that's how I got to executive architecture. And it was mostly through a girlfriend who was already working there, who was working at, I think, Parsons prior to that.
It makes a lot of sense when you unpack that. And I think a lot of us who have ended up in some aspect of the construction industry have lived a very similar journey. Like I was a proposal manager and marketing manager for a number of years for a large general contractors. And I burned out as well. And I got to a point where I resigned. I was like, I won't do this anymore.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate that it gets to that point because there are other paths, there are other options, regardless of where you fit into the broader AEC spectrum. And I think we can do people a service in being more transparent about that. And I love how you just really stepped back and said, this is what I like to do. And then we're fortunate enough to figure out that, hey, there's an opportunity where I can narrow my focus here, because as somebody who understands that producing new ideas all the time can be fatiguing, I can see why it was challenging sometimes to say, okay, every time I work with a new customer, I have to come up with, this brand new inception versus just tell me what you want and I will give it to you in the best possible way. And those are two very different conversations. And I feel like, at least for me as well, the one where it's, everything is inception every time can be way more stressful and very tiring at times, especially if your stuff isn't getting used.
And especially after 5 years of, school where you're doing that in the studio consistently, where that started getting me like super, super anxious. It's like, wow, I need to come up with something new, something new, something new. You can't just invent the wheel and be done with it. You have to reinvent the wheel consistently depending on your parameters or whatever someone's giving you. And it just goes straight into the architectural career itself. And it, like you said, it's just such a big umbrella. Like even within architecture, there's taxes I got to do at the end of the year. There is, staffing and all of this other stuff that, again, your only focus, naively coming out of high school, it's, oh, I get to build these really, really cool buildings. And it's kind of smack in the face once you get out there.
Yeah.
But I found something that I loved and it's really, really cool.
I can see where that's difficult. And it's also oftentimes in our industry, feast or famine, in that, things are quiet and slow and you might have one project for a little while and then you have 9. And I just remember managing, 6, 7, 8 proposals at once. And most of these are worth between $20 to $100 million each, or sometimes $300, $400, $500 million. And just the intense stress of that over and over and over, because there's always a new one coming. Another one hits the inbox, and when you get to that point where it hits the inbox and you go, I'm not excited about this anymore. It's definitely prudent to step back and go, what do I want? What do I want to do?
Yeah.
And it's hard to get to that point sometimes.
And I think the stress is still there. Obviously, we're still doing kind of the proposals and all that, but it's a different stress that I'm much more willing to go for on the day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you can kind of focus things instead of the crazy broad spectrum that we're talking about here. So I'm curious, can you tell me a bit more about the clients that you're supporting, and what kind of criteria makes them decide that they would like to work with an executive architect versus the more typical process that it sounds like folks find themselves on? Like what brings them to you? How does that happen?
I think there is a level of sophistication for different kinds of clients where, just like I didn't know that there was executive architecture, a lot of developers also don't know that. And there are some developers who only strictly work in that kind of relationship because they know they're getting the best of both worlds. So for example, Hines here in San Francisco and Bay Hill, who were doing the third tallest tower in the city, which is really cool. They work specifically with DA AOR relationships. And that's how they know how to do it, because they can manage the process. And similarly, you want the star architect, the black cake architect who comes in from Europe, and they know, they've got the design chops, but they don't necessarily know the local municipality. They don't know California building code, which is super nuanced, versus the IBC, et cetera, et cetera. So there's those clients who only work with it versus the clients whom you end up educating about it. And, in some instances, you pay for a premium, you're paying for two architects, but there is a level of handoff that I don't think some clients understand, where yes, you're heavy with the design architect at the beginning, and then you're heavy with the architect of record at the end. And it's just a matter of educating them and kind of figuring out, is this the right thing for your project? And is this the right way that you want to go?
Yeah, it makes sense. And there's such a collaborative aspect of construction with so many different parties that are playing roles along the way. And unfortunately, sometimes it can be a bit contentious, and our contract vehicles are structured oftentimes where it's like, how can we, push risk elsewhere, which I understand. There's you have to protect your company and the people that you're working with. But I think as we're striving to be more sustainable and accelerate project schedules and doing all of these things that are more and more required for fast tracking our schedules in construction, we have to really look at how can we improve the entire process. And it sounds like the relationships that you offer really do that. And I'd like to hear more about, how are you effectively collaborating with all of these different stakeholders? You have the architect, you're the architect of record, you're working with the design architect, the owner, the contractors, are the subs playing a party in this? Are you down in the material supplies? Like how does all this come together, and how, is it not uncontrolled chaos?
It's fun, I think. So you've got, because of what we do, we are service oriented. Yes, architects do the design and they do the cool stuff, but what we do, it's more on the project management level. So our goal is to ensure, one, that the designer's design is met. And we want to ensure that the owner's vision is met. Ultimately, they're paying for this. And we want to ensure that the contractor's got all of the information that they need when they need it. And I think our philosophy is not to let the perfect stop the good enough. I think there's, contractors who say, oh, dumb architect, which is fine. I think architects say, oh, dumb contractor, right? It goes back and forth. But our goal is to make sure that we're providing full service for everybody and ensuring that those communications are met, whether it's in the RFP process, helping ownership with contractor bidding and being there with the contractors when we're interviewing them and making sure, hey, you got all of the price right. Like there is solid white oak here. You are seeing that there's this in that kind of process, to make sure that, in the bid process, there's always like, oh, well, we assumed XYZ. Cool, but it says this in the drawing. So let's make sure that we're capturing this. And I'd rather have higher GMP at the beginning than, death by a million cuts with a bunch of change orders, which happens all the time. But it's like, ask the question. We're here to answer it. We're not trying to get one over the contractor or the owner. There's drawings. Let's look at the drawings together and make sure you're understanding our process.
I'm chuckling because I've been the recipient of so many RFPs where there's just this broad ambiguity, or I look at it and I go, oh, this was copied and pasted from a different RFP, and none of this makes any sense. And you're floating out clarifying questions. And, particularly when I was working with a federal contractor, oftentimes those questions would just go completely unanswered. You submit 200 questions and they answer 17 of them. They go, yeah, we don't want to answer those ones. And so, you're building in contingency and you're like, whoa, those bids are $20 million apart. Why is that? And it's because one assumes something, one assumes something else. And I'm excited because even though I don't want to be a proposal manager anymore, I see the value in just getting all of that information in a way that's so much more transparent and available. And I think even just not being available oftentimes, kills people, because you end up in this change order land and RFIs, and now your project slows down and you have change conditions and somebody steps in and the steel detailer goes, we can't do that. That's not possible. And if you are able to inform everything with those conversations earlier, I think it's a huge win for everybody on the project, even if, there might be more people in the room than somebody might be used to, but there's a huge value in that.
Well, this is where design build comes in. That's super helpful. Or there's, I forget what it's called, but when you've got, the contractor and, for pre-con or kind of design assist, that's always been so helpful. Like right now we're working on mass timber building in Santa Monica. and we've got the mass timber supplier on design assist. And we're reviewing our details with them with structural engineer and saying, hey, we really want to do this. Is this feasible? Or how can we better streamline this detail in the shop? So when it comes out on site, the actual installer also is part of this conversation where they're not saying, oh, well, even the manufacturer didn't know what's happening and they're working the bubble in their computer and they're not on site actually doing this. They could have done this better. And having that collaboration at the beginning and facilitating that, I think it's an extra cost to the owner, but it's so much better for the project in the end.
Yeah, and I think that reduces cost in the long term because you're not stuck in this dance of ambiguity or finger pointing. And I have to chuckle your mention of mass timber because we've got a giant example of that
Yes,
directly
exactly.
over my right shoulder. So again, for everybody out there listening but not watching, you should check us out on YouTube. We are in a very cool space right now. But I'd like to get a little bit deeper into something you mentioned when we first met, and that your team really strives to close the feedback loop in a very big way on the projects that you're working on. Can you tell me a little bit more the strategies that you've employed when taking lessons learned from a projects and helping inform them for future decisions on future projects? I think there's often a gap in construction where we might learn a ton of stuff on an individual project, and oftentimes we're not afforded that vehicle to take that and apply it to the next one. And it's hard, and I empathize with that. But I'm curious what that looks like for your team.
Well, there's a couple of things and so many things that we actually do. I actually had a presentation this morning at 9. So every Friday internally in our office, we have this thing called code breakers. And essentially one of our principals, Doug, he goes through every chapter of the building code, one chapter a week. And it's a consistent, we've gone through it, I think 3 times now. And today I was working on exit passageways, chapter 10, and kind of informing everybody, hey, these are lessons learned from various projects that we've done where, and I'll get into the nitty gritty in an exit passageway is an extension of your means of egress, so your exit stair. And your exit passageway needs to be rated, and you can't have non-normally occupied spaces going into your exit passageway, which is like an electrical room, a storage room. So in one of our projects, when we went into plan check, it was, oh, you can't have this electrical room open into that exit passageway because if there's a fire, no one's going to notice it. And that was a lessons learned from a project. So what we're doing is, in my presentation, I just had all of these plans up and color coordinating, like this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, kind of pushing that forward, but also doing the same thing when you're on site. I think a lot of the pitfalls or shortfalls, what happens with architects in particular is some people just don't have that field experience where they get to be on site with the contractor. And again, you're just working in this bubble of Revit or AutoCAD where you don't actually know how this gets put together. And another thing that we do to help with the lessons learned or even have more collaboration with our contractor is to be there with them. And, you go on site and you get yelled at and get called a dumb architect. And one of the things that I have found to be super successful for me, it's like, okay, are you done telling me how bad I am? Now tell me how I can learn from this. And I think that's been one of our strongest relationships and one of our strongest proponents for HRA in particular is, oh, yeah, we like working with HRA because they are a partner with us in the field. It's not contentious where, well, this is my design, figure it out. It's how can we come to a happy medium and understand where the contractor is coming from? Sometimes it could be, well, this detail wasn't in the drawing, this detail wasn't in the drawing, why isn't it here? And you can help point to them where it is because ultimately they're trying to get their sub to do the work. And trying to understand where the questions are coming from their perspective is also like key, from dealing with them to the owner to the design architect. It's why are you asking this question? And how can I help you answer to someone else as to why there is this change order, right? It's someone didn't see something or this detail isn't feasible. How can we help get to the end of this instead of just constant headbutting? And that's been super key. And what we want to do, at least for our staff, is get everyone to cut their teeth and go be on a construction site.
Yeah, it's important.
Let's go look at it. I was on a construction site for a year in a trailer with all of the contractors. And I was like, I learned so much and it's invaluable experience that you can't learn in the office or in school.
Yeah, I love how there's like a second layer to those conversations. It's like, help me understand what made this question originate, instead of just being focused on, possibly people are frustrated or whatever. It's like, because you get to inform so much of that. And the contractor gets to qualify that in a way that they might not have felt either comfortable with or even thought about doing it. And it's such a win for both sides of that, because they're forced to step back and go, okay, why do I have this question? What is the thing that happened that made this ambiguous? And then everybody gets to learn from that when they're doing the designing or sharing the documentation, because they go, okay, I'm taking a look at this now and I understand where this gap is. This is a consistent thing for, our team. We'll stop doing this. Or here's 2 clicks more detail than we'd offered before. Now everybody has that, and you don't have to start that feedback loop of finger pointing and emailing and calling, or hopefully, using some more focused technology to manage your RFI process, because, text message and emails don't do a service at the scale we're building at anymore.
Yeah.
And I'd like to also look at your relationship with your clients who might not be quite so imaginative in the solutions that you're bringing. So can you give me some context on, working with teams who are a bit more entrenched in doing it the old way, and how do you bring them to the table in a way that gets them excited about, trying something different or working in a different way than they have historically?
We aren't the ones who are trying to necessarily teach someone something new. It's designers who are doing that. And from our part, if the designer is wanting to do something that's innovative in materials or in lead or sustainability, our job is to show the client how this is achievable, but not necessarily sell it to them. Right? It's more so the designer is the one who's pitching it. And that's so cool about what we do is I can work on a vet clinic, I could work on a tower, I can work on resi, because my job is to make sure it gets done, not necessarily to sell that vision.
Okay. I appreciate that nuance there. And it's more like, let's get this across the finish line and figure out how it's actually feasible. And, I'm sure there's moments where we identify, okay, this part actually isn't feasible. Let's figure out how we can get it as close to what your vision is now that you've been, sold on this and are excited about it. And, at the end of the day, everybody has, better documentation, more visibility, and a big win there. I appreciate that clarifier there. It shows my lack of familiarity with this side of the fence.
No, this is fine. This
and that's
is good.
Okay. I appreciate these conversations because I get a glimpse into something that I don't normally have a chance to look a lot closer at. And it's really enjoyable for me. So thank you for offering that. I'm curious, tell me, what's a typical day like leading your team? You're working as the managing partner of House Robertson. You got this office here in San Francisco, and assuming there is a typical day in the life, like what does it look like in your world?
It's a myriad of so many things. Like one of my biggest complaints is that architects or whatnot, you're not taught how to lead people, right? You're taught how to design. You're taught how to create documents, and you're not taught how to manage an office, how to do taxes, how to do billing and invoices. So my day ranges from so many things. Initially, when I first started my career, it's like come in, draft, do details, client meetings. And now it's draft, do details a little bit, but it's the client meetings, it's the shepherding staff. And how do you learn this new thing? And it's all over the place. Like yesterday, I worked on a proposal. I, had office hours. So I was there for my staff to be there for them for mentorship. Right now we're an ESOP. So we're employee owned stock, like 49% right now. Eventually we'll transition, but I'm getting all the information to the appraiser. It's all over the place. It's really cool. And it's so nice the days where I get to just sit there and actually detail and draw something. Because like, oh, this is relaxing. I remember when this used to stress the heck out of me, but now it's like, hey, I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I can focus. Like this is it today. Yeah, I like that.
It's being there for everybody. I think it's at this point in my career, it's being a role model and helping people learn. I think that's what I love about our office, and what I do is I love learning every day, and I'll learn things new every day. And I want my staff to do that as well, whether they're going to be with me for the long haul or for the next 2 weeks. Like, I just want them to get the best out of their career so then they can go to their next place and just be like, look how kick-ass I am. And look all of the great things that I can do, and just be able to be the best that they can be. So that's my goal, but my day-to-day just varies widely depending on who needs what.
At the core of everything you're sharing right now, though, there's such an important point where some organizations, and I'm not talking about architects or GCs or anything, this is more broadly just as far as like companies and leadership. We do people a disservice sometimes in promoting them into leadership roles without necessarily giving them the opportunity to learn and train to do the job that you're talking about right now. Because leading people, as you pointed out so clearly, is a very different thing from being the doer of the job that you were brought on originally.
100%.
And it's kind of terrifying the first time you step into it, but you can't show that. You have to be very confidence inspiring. As you mentioned before, you're a bit of a role model, whether you anticipated that or not. And I've started seeing more organizations think about this more intentionally. And I think any company that, promotes internally and cultivates their people and is very intentional about how they develop those leadership skills. And also, I think, qualifies what are good leadership skills for this organization? What values do we bring? Is it just, I want butts and seats and productivity? You might not be a great manager, but if you care about the core of the people that you're working with, and I love how you pointed out, I want to set you up to be successful wherever you're working. That is such a privilege to do and a mindset to have, because not everybody has that. They go, I want to retain this person. I want to keep them. I need them doing that. And those people will eventually leave because they don't feel empowered to grow and learn and develop in their own career. But I think, especially when we're all in school, unless you're, in like a business management focus area where all you do is I'm learning how to lead a company, we're not given the skill set in any capacity. And we oftentimes fall into it in a way that is very abrupt.
Yeah. And I think I received that opportunity where someone's like, let me distill all of my knowledge into you without expecting something back. And that's been fantastic. Like I love doing that. And yeah, it's just been great.
Yeah, it's a rewarding thing when you get to work with people and you see them develop and they pick up the new thing and now they're doing something better than you did before. And it's heck yeah, like that feels great. And I don't think all leaders have that in the back of their head sometimes, which is unfortunate. But I think the more we talk about it and point that out, I think there's a value there.
Oh, that's what I was going to say. It was like Jim and Doug started this company in their garage, right? And it's just them two, and they slowly started growing. But then now there's Allison and Carl and myself who run our Culver City, Houston office together. That where are we taking this company on the next step? And it's no longer the two guys in their garage, right? And like 5 people, there's about 50 of us across all 3 offices. And what do we see? We're the next generation. And yes, we didn't go to business school, but we've got that opportunity to push the next generation. And who do we see are going to be the next leaders in the office? And how do we just disseminate that? And I think one of the conversations we've been having lately is, what is our mission? And I've been tasked with writing that out, and my mission is to teach. I don't want to teach in an academic sense, but in just to teach and distill knowledge, because that's the best legacy you can have. It doesn't yes, it's really cool to see my building and the skyline when I'm flying out of the city, but it's I get gratification from seeing the new generation build their own relationships with our contractors, with the clients. And my best thing is having the contractor or the client call me out of the blue and be like, oh, hey, I just want to ask you this really quick question. That's the best thing you can get out of it. Yes, obviously money, but that is the most gratifying part of all of it.
There's a business case to be made in the mix of that too. I mean, obviously we are all doing business and there needs to be revenue and we're earning money and everything else. But when you grow those people, they do stick around. They get better at what they do. The relationships they build with the contractors, the customers, everybody you're working with is better. You're going to get more business because these people that you work with and employ are just knocking it out of the park with the work that they're doing. You get all of these benefits. And so this is a long-term conversation. It's not just I helped you because it makes me feel good and I know that you're helping your career. You are also helping the business too. And I think sometimes people lose sight of that.
Yeah, it's so cool. One of the interns that I had working on the building that moved me up here, he just opened his own office in Santa Barbara. And it's yeah, I was so excited for you, Andrew. This is so cool that you went from being our intern, you ended up moving back to Portland, and now you're here. That is amazing. I'm so happy for him, and I want nothing but success on that front.
And you might work with him again in the future too.
Yeah.
So you've just built this baseline, which is great. And I have to say, Everything you're doing is really impressive. I mean, you're 35 years old. You are leading this architecture firm office in San Francisco, working on the third tallest tower in the city, as you mentioned earlier. Like, tell me a little bit more about how you found your path in these opportunities. It sounds like you've had some great mentors along the way, but what has this journey led to, and how have you managed to, cultivate everything into a lot of really impressive success?
I think, it's been having those mentors. And obviously, I talked about kind of the struggles of getting into architecture or executive architecture and being a bit disillusioned. But having Doug, who is Doug Robertson of House and Robertson, he has been one of my greatest supports. And, the moment I started working, like he's the one who hired me on the spot. The moment I started working at HRA, I was like, hey, I want to help you retire. I want to make six figures. He's like, okay, this is how we get here and this is how you do it. And what I found was being the squeaky wheel. And how do I advocate for myself? Because what I've learned is no one's going to advocate as much for you other than you. There's always a business to be done, right? There's financials, there's so many things. And some people find it really hard to advocate for themselves, but they can advocate for their friend all day. So it's like, hey, talk about yourself the way you would talk about a friend whom you're really, really proud of. And just doing that and doing your best work, but also with a sense of humility. I think there's some people who come into it who think I'm like a hot shot and say, I earned this because I've been here for so long. There is a fine line between that. It's longevity isn't going to get you there. It's, are you busting your butt to get here? Are you actually doing good work and being a bit introspective? Like, I don't think I've ever been. Maybe I have. It's just like, I earned this, therefore I deserve this. It's like, I want to do a good job and I'm enjoying what I'm doing. And the proof is in the pudding. I've enjoyed it so much and I'm willing to take on new things. And I'm always like, hand raised, yeah, give me this opportunity and let me learn from it. That's how I got to where I am. Like, I moved up here in 2019, 6 months before the pandemic, to open up an office at 29. Like, where does that come from? I had been at HRA for 5 years. The biggest thing I had done until then was a 3,000 square foot temple in LA. To move up here to be on site for construction for a 620,000 square foot, 25-story office tower.
And that just doesn't materialize.
Like, that's amazing. Yeah. And it's been the willing to do the work and willing to, long nights, yes, crying at my desk because someone really messed up a detail, fine. But I showed that I'm passionate for it. And I'm passionate to make the company's goals kind of go where they need to go. And that's where I have found that success. But it's also been having that mentorship, because it's been, if it wasn't for Doug saying, yes, go do it, being blind to sex that I'm a woman, it's just, hey, yeah, you've got the chops for it. How can I teach you to do better? Like, that's been it.
I love that. And the squeaky wheel analogy is a good one. I've had similar experience in my career. I mean, I had the opportunity to work and live in Dubai for a couple of years when I was working for my first general contractor. And that opportunity arose. I had heard some musings in the company. They're like, we kind of need a proposal manager in Dubai. And the moment that came up, I was like, me, send me, I'll go. Me, hi, I'm right here. There's a way to advocate in the squeaky wheel environment where you're not being a absolute pain in the butt where people are like, oh my God, this guy's coming back to talk about this.
Right.
But there's a skill set in learning how to advocate for yourself. And it's another one that I don't think folks are often empowered or taught on how to do. And some people have the gift of gab. I feel like I might have that right now, given the, the nature of my job right now, but it's a skill set that everybody can learn. And I feel like sometimes we're discouraged from it too. It's like, oh, don't talk about yourself because that's, you're going to have an ego in that moment. And as you mentioned, there is a balance in that conversation. And I think all of us can do a better job of thoughtfully advocating for ourselves. And it's okay. It's just, figure out the swim lane or whatever you want to say, where it makes sense to do it in the way that is going to be compelling to your audience to hopefully get what you want to do. And sometimes people say no, and that's okay as well.
I think you have to be okay with the no.
Yeah, and it feels weird at first too. I want to do this. No, you can't do that.
Well, what's the worst thing they're going to happen? Say it's no. Okay, well, how do I get here? And I think also another thing that I've learned in advocating for myself and in general with managing contractors or clients or any of it, it's don't just come with a problem statement. Say, this is my problem statement, but this is what I think the answer is, or this is the work I've done to get here. Now I've got a question and show your work for it. Don't just say, oh, choose me because I've been here for 15 years. It's no, choose me. This is why. This is what I can bring to the table, right? It's not just a handout. It's a, here's the entire package.
Yep.
And I think that's also key. Or sometimes I'll ask a client, hey, how do I do this? Or what do you want? But it's, I've done X, Y, Z. This is the question I have. This is what I think the answer is. Is this correct? Right? There's such a difference in that presentation that is also critical in advocating for yourself or life in general.
I love that too. And I've been given that advice in the past, and it's incredibly effective because you're kind of setting up the person you're talking to. You're giving them the solution and you're making it easy. And if you pitch it in a way that makes sense because you've built it on everything you've done and some of those ideas, it is so much more effective than just showing up and saying, hey, I've recognized that there's a problem here. I think somebody should go do this, with just a sentence and a qualification. And somebody's reaction to that in the moment without more nuance of the why or the how, it's a lot easier to look and they go, that's going to cost money. I think that's going to be a lot of work. I don't even know how we get there to come up with the idea to make that happen. And if you show up with the right level of detail and you go, I think this needs to happen, or I've identified this, here's what I think we should do. You're making it so much easier for that person you're talking to say yes to what you're doing.
What's your business case for starting a podcast?
I got asked that exact question when I started this, and I had to go figure it out because I wasn't sure.
Yeah.
And it's built over time, and I'm very privileged to be doing what we're doing right now as well. It all kind of comes, and sometimes it's very surprising where the direction goes when you ask a question or you look for an opportunity. But those cool opportunities, I think those are the really neat points in somebody's career where you step back and go, okay, I asked to do this, and they said yes, and then I sat down in that, and it was not what I was expecting, but gosh, a lot of cool stuff happened after that.
Yeah, like again, I'm doing taxes. What? Yes, I wanted to run an office, but okay, there's all of this other stuff that I didn't realize was happening behind the scenes. Happy to do it, but it was, this also comes, like I'm having my cake and I'm eating it too, but maybe I didn't want to eat all that cake.
Yeah,
right?
those are the moments where we grow though. We step back and then we also figure out more of what we like to do and what we don't do. And as you develop like an organization, you can bring more people into the team, helping with those portions. You can focus on new stuff. Like this is all iterative, and you still get to make that business case, even if occasionally part of that, new piece of the puzzle you've been offered might not all be as sexy as you'd hoped it might be. It's still a pretty cool opportunity. And if it doesn't work out and you don't like it, you can always go back to doing what you're doing before. That's okay too.
And also you are the master of your own destiny. Like you're not, you choose to be here, right? Like you can change it.
I love this. So I've got one final question for you today that I ask everybody. And I'm curious, what is one tool that you'll use on any project, no matter what project you're working on?
So multiple answers to this. One, there's the physical tools. All of our projects are in Revit, so we're obviously model everything. But if I give that more thought, the one tool that we use on every project is just the history of everything else that we've done. It's the tool that we bring to everything. It's giving everything thought and looking at it from another person's perspective and what have I learned that to make this more streamlined. I think it's just, what is it? The word that tribal knowledge, which again, I don't know if that's PC or not, but the tribal knowledge that we've come to on today, it's okay, what have I learned? What can I do better on the next one? It's always just trying to do better. Again, not be perfect, but do better. And it's having that skill set and that knowledge. And it's hard to do when you're a freshie out of school, but you have all of your senior managers behind you to pump that information to you so you can provide that info. But it's just previous knowledge, just and an open mindset. And it's like, okay, let's go get it.
It makes sense. And it really comes back to the feedback loop conversation that we were having earlier. And that can be, as an individual, what have I learned? How am I building on this? Ooh, that didn't go very well, so we're going to adjust this later. But with the broader organization, that's how the business grows too, especially when you're able to take that from project to project, to customer. You're getting more repeat business. All of these things really build. I mean, if you run a company where when every single project ends, it's like you shook the Etch-a-Sketch and everybody just step back and you go, okay, we're going to do a new one now. And you don't take anything to that next project, the company's probably not going to grow in the way another one does that employs everything you're talking about too. So I like that answer. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. And don't be afraid of feedback. Like, again, it might be bad, but okay, what can I learn from that? this one project we finished, we went to our contractors. What could we have done better? And, you'll get the, oh, well, I don't know. But it's like, no, I really want to know.
Yeah, like, please tell me.
Don't give me lip
sincere
service. Like,
question.
I want to know, should I have been on site more often? Was there too much of a lag between responding to an RFI? Like, what did you need from me that, again, I can learn and just do better on the next one? And then they appreciate that. It's like, oh, I'm being heard, right?
And that's a skill set that people have to learn as well. I used to get so wound up, especially in my writing, because like I'm a technical writer by trade as I rolled into proposal management and everything. And it stings sometimes when you get that feedback and you put this together and you feel good about it. You're like, gosh, like I think this technical narrative, this is it. Like nobody's going to have any comments. And then they just highlight it and delete it and write a new one. And you go, oh, okay, I was off the mark. But you can go two ways with that. You go, okay, how do we get here? Why did they redline 60% of what I did or whatever that might be? And sometimes somebody might just say, oh, I'm going to write it better, and they're going to do it. But sometimes there might be a core of that. And if you can figure that out and feel okay with that discomfort, I think you get to learn a lot too, instead of just being super wound up about the review process. I'm thinking about red teams and proposal land now, and like, getting a little bit uncomfortable because the first ones that I went through were brutal because, it's a $100 million project working on. So people are going to poke the holes in. Red team is when you're doing a proposal process, basically you bring it to a group of people who review it like they're pretending that they're the evaluators of the proposal, and they eviscerate the proposal manager. So it can be not very nice sometimes, especially if it's a must-win project or a very high-profile project.
Got it.
Yeah. Early in the career, it's a anxiety-inducing environment.
But you learn. And it's being having some humility and be like, okay. But yeah, it's looking at it from their point of view.
Yep.
I think that's a really good process. Like, oh, hey, if I was on the other side, would I accept this? And like, I think that's a tool I can learn from today. And just, we're writing a proposal for a project. And it's like, hey, would I accept this? Yep. What are your shortcomings?
And it's a totally different way to think about it too, because we can get so tied up in what we're proposing. We know all the nuances of the project and the way we're going to bring it to execution. We're fired up about it. But you got to kind of shake that a little bit and step back and go, okay, if I'm just reading this and I need to go build this building and this is the lowest price technically acceptable proposal we're working on today, do they care about anything we're here, or are they just checking all the boxes to go down the thing? Have we checked all those boxes?
Yeah.
Have we managed to slip in some betterments in a way that does get them to perk up? And hopefully not every proposal in the history of time is a hard bid proposal, but there's some nuance there, and there's a lot to learn from it when you're just thinking about it, even if you're not getting roasted by a red team in the 11th hour of a proposal deadline or a deadline. So
sounds painful, but yeah totally.
Yeah, there's a reason why I don't do it anymore.
Great. Yeah.
Well, Alma, thank you so much for joining me today. This has been an absolutely wonderful conversation. And for everybody out there listening, of course, you've probably figured out by now that you are listening to the Digital Builder Podcast. If you are listening and not watching, as I've mentioned a couple times today, we are in the absolutely lovely Autodesk Gallery right now. So make sure you head over to YouTube, check out the episode. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you get your podcasts. If you got a question for me, of course, you can head over to LinkedIn. I am Eric Thomas, probably the only one that works at Autodesk. And until the next time, goodbye.